Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to today's event. I'm Jason Gumpert from msdynamicsworld.com, and I'm really pleased to be able to host this event. Our presenter today is Nicolas Hayduk of Engineered Code. If you don't know him, he is a real expert on portals and Adxstudio technology, having actually worked formerly there. I'll let him do more of an introduction himself. But today's event is really two different parts, Adxstudio migration and the newest features in 8.4. As we get started today, we also just want to learn a little bit more about your use of portals. So I'm going to just launch a quick poll just so we get a better understanding of who you are and what your interests are. You should see that to the right of the main presentation area now, and if you could fill that out, we'll use that to shape the rest of the session. If you have questions today, look for the Q&A block, again to the right of the main presentation area. That's where you can ask questions at any point. I know Nicolas will be making time for those throughout the event. And if you don't see the Q&A, look for a question mark icon in the upper right. That might open it up for you. So I see those answers coming in. I'll leave the poll open for a few more seconds here, and then we'll show you the results. But Nicolas, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Perfect, thank you. Again, my name is Nicolas Hayduk, and I'm very excited to be here this afternoon, this morning, depending, I guess, where you are. I'm located here in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. So it's about 10 o'clock my time, but I know on the East Coast you guys are heading into lunchtime. So I appreciate Jason having me here today. The plan today is to go through the Adxstudio migration as well as the new features that are available in what's now known as portal capabilities for Dynamics 365. The name for the product kind of keeps changing. It was Adxstudio back in the day. Then it was kind of referred to as Dynamics 365 Portals. And now anything that comes out from Microsoft you'll see as portal capabilities for Dynamics 365. So I'll just jump in here. Again, quick introduction. Again, my name is Nicolas Hayduk. I'm a software engineer and the president of Engineered Code Consulting, Inc. We are a small firm based here in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada, and we specialize in Dynamics 365 Portals implementations. I've personally worked with Dynamics 365 Portals since the beginning, essentially, since they were launched as Adxstudio Portals back in kind of 2010. And as Jason mentioned, I was once a member of the Adxstudio team, so that's kind of how I got started working with Adxstudio kind of back in the day. So, as we've said, there are two main topics for today's session. The first is the release of version 8.4. And then the second thing we're going to get into is the document that was released by Microsoft in February, where they kind of provided their official guidance on how to move from version 7 to version 8. So those are our kind of two main topics for today. Now, just taking a quick look at the poll results, I'm seeing that there are a lot of people using Adxstudio version 7 still, as well as quite a few people on the new version 8, which is great. And I see a number of people on both. I'm assuming those are probably partners with perhaps projects on both. So looks like there's quite a wide array of people on version 7, people on version 8, and people using both. So hopefully this all parts of this session should be applicable to kind of all you folks. Now, first I'm going to get into the new release version 8.4. So this came out back in February. There was a small little update released here in March. There are about 35 bug fixes in it. I think last check I had counted 38 fixes. So nothing kind of major. There's always kind of little things that they're finding that they end up fixing. So kind of a bunch of bug fixes, as well as features in three major areas. The first one being the ability to view details about server-side errors. The second one is the ability to to renew your authentication key. And the third one are some enhancements to help customers meet the GDPR requirements. Now, if you don't know what GDPR is, I would guess you're probably living under a rock, because it's really all we've been hearing about for the last few months here. Especially, I mean, if you're in Europe and you don't know what GDPR is, you need to look it up like right now. I'd probably leave the session and look that up, because that's super, super critical. But anyone kind of in the world, anyone doing business with any customers in Europe, GDPR is a very important topic. So it's nice to see Microsoft has released some features that help make customers of portals, be able to be GDPR compliant. So the first feature that I'll get into here is the server-side error details. So I'm a developer, technical background. This was awesome when we first found out about it. In the past, if you were to do something in your portal that caused the portal to generate a server-side error, the error message that you got was close to useless. It was just a generic, for those of you familiar with ASP.NET, it was kind of a generic custom error screen that said, hey, an error has occurred. It would give you an ID that you could then contact Microsoft and get support, and hopefully they could use that ID to find some stuff in their error logs. But for people not wanting to, engage Microsoft for every kind of little small thing like that, it didn't provide any indication at all what the error was that was occurring. So typically, you're going to see server-side errors in a portal when something is misconfigured, especially when something is missing. So there's a lot of things that are required by the portal's code, but not necessarily marked as a required field in the CRM. So you get into those situations. In the past, you'd see that generic error screen, and you'd get kind of stuck. Again, your options were you could submit a support ticket to Microsoft, and a lot of times you could be successful with that approach, but you probably weren't getting your problem solved in the next 5 to 10 minutes. The other option was trial and error, which was the approach that we often had to take. Just kind of poking around, seeing what changes had you made since you last, since it was last successful, since it was working, and try and kind of troubleshoot from there and figure out what was going on. Now what you can do is you can tell your portal, hey, I want you to turn off the custom error page, and I want you to show me what ASP.NET developers lovingly refer to as the yellow screen of death. So on the screen there on the right-hand side, you will see the yellow screen of death there, and what you're going to see is the error, the exception message, the stack trace, a lot more information, telling us exactly kind of what's going on. Now, sometimes those error messages can still be a little bit cryptic, if it's just an object reference not set to an instance of an object, things like that. But hopefully there'll be at least, by looking at the stack trace and looking at the error message, it's a lot more information than the pretty much no information that we had before. So, for developers working on implementations, this is a fantastic new feature that they've given us. And the great news is that it's super easy to turn on. If you go into your portal admin center, you'll go to the screen that has all those kind of blue buttons that I've shown there. And you can see there's just a button that says disable custom errors. And you hit that button, and then kind of going forward, if your portal encounters a server-side error, it will show you the yellow screen of death as opposed to that generic error page. The next one here, again related to the server-side errors, is the ability to actually save the application error logs to the Azure blob storage. So kind of like how you can say, if you were managing the server yourself, you could jump on the server, look at the event viewer. This is similar to that. So what you can do is you give it essentially your connection string to Azure blob storage, and all of these exceptions that are occurring start getting logged out to Azure storage. It will essentially create a container called the telemetry logs in whatever Azure storage account you provide it. You get to choose the retention period. You can see in the screenshot here we've got 30. You've got retention period of 30 days. That's all configurable. Again, very easy to set up. You give a connection string, you give the retention period, and those files will kind of automatically start appearing in your Azure storage here. Now, going on to the next kind of feature, again along the same lines of the server-side errors. This one's a little more technical, but there is the ability to display errors that are coming from custom plugins. A lot of times with portals, because we don't have the ability to write server-side code in the portals themselves, people are relying on writing plugins related to the entities that are being displayed. Now, a lot of the times, custom plugin errors are showing up in Ajax requests, so that means they're not kind of as, the user may not be seeing them. You're not going to get the even the generic error page in those cases. So what they've done is via site setting, you can turn it on so that if one of these custom plugins does generate an error, you will see the error on the page. Now, just of note, what you'll see is only the exception message. You won't see the full stack trace. The good news is that if you use say the login to Azure, all those exceptions should be in there as well. So it's kind of just a little kind of supplemental thing for people who are doing a lot of custom plugin development. It's just a little quicker way of sometimes finding those error messages. Now, in terms of best practices, what our recommendation is that you turn off the custom errors so you can see the yellow screen of death, but only do that in development. Once you've launched, typically you don't want to be exposing kind of the technical details of the errors to your users. So we recommend turn off the custom errors in development so that you can see the full error details. But then once you go to production, then you use the ability to save those files to Azure storage in production. That way you still have a log of what's happening. If users report issues, you can still see the logs, but you're not kind of showing them all those error details, which typically we like to kind of keep to ourselves. One other kind of small feature that was added as well is, and you'll see there at the bottom of the screen that there is that is the custom error page that used to show the generic one that you can now turn off. They have offered a little bit of customizability there. You have the ability to customize the text that kind of shows up there at the top with content snippets. So you can see where it says, this is a custom error, please file a support ticket with a screenshot of the error by clicking here. That's a custom snippet that you can edit on the CRM. So that kind of wraps up the server-side error details. Again, if you're a developer or you have a team of developers working on portals, yeah, like this is going to be it's going to save you hours of time if you ever run into server-side errors. The next one here I'll get into is the application key renewal. Now this one's a little bit more technical, and that is the fact that portals authenticates against your Dynamics 365 instance using an Azure Active Directory application. Now, this uses a kind of an authentication key that needs to be renewed every 2 years. The thing is that portals we're just kind of coming up on that 2-year period for portals. So this feature, it wasn't like Microsoft wouldn't let you do it before. It just was unnecessary because when they get turned on, the key lasts 2 years, and so now Microsoft has kind of introduced the ability to renew these keys at this point because basically the early adopters are getting to that point where they're going to have to start renewing these authentication keys. Now it's important that these authentication keys get renewed. If not, your portal will stop working. Now they do have email notifications that will be sent out, and there are a lot of them. They have them at 90, 60, 30, 15, a week before, like a ton of emails before, and then in the week leading up to your authentication key expiring, they'll email you every day. On the day that your key is expiring, it'll be like 12, 6, 3 hours. So if you've got the email notification set up, you're going to get bombarded if you're not actually renewing your authentication key. And then if it happens to expire, then you're going to get daily reminders for a week saying, hey, your key's expired. So they've done a good job of setting up these notifications so that you will get them. You will get a notification in your portal admin center, as well as on the services about page, which is a page that is most likely familiar to any developers out there, because that's where that the kill cache button or the ability to reset your cache on your portal exists on that page as well. So essentially what they've done is they've given you a simple interface where you can click the button update key. Not really much more complicated than that. Again, just wasn't necessary before, wasn't a feature that was required before because nobody's authentication keys had expired since they were good for 2 years. Now this process takes about 5 to 7 minutes, during which time the portal will be restarted. So other than that, it's a pretty seamless process. Just click the button and it will renew your key again for another 2 years. Finally, in terms of the new features, just going to talk a little bit about GDPR. So what they've done is they've added some new features to help support customers in the European Union who are subject to the General Data Protection Regulations, which are designed to give European Union citizens more control over their personal data. You know, some people call it the right to be forgotten law. And all this comes into effect May 25th of 2018. So, you know, we've got another couple months until it comes into effect. So that's why there's kind of there's a lot of stuff going on right now about GDPR. And yeah, thankfully Microsoft has released some features to the portal that should allow you to be compliant, GDPR compliant, when it comes to your portal. So the first of those features being the ability to audit when a user last successfully logged in. So there's essentially just a field that says last successful login. And what that allows administrators to do is they can identify users that haven't been in a while, inactive users, and they can be deleted, because that's one of the conditions of GDPR, that someone who hasn't been on your site for a while, you know, you need to kind of clean up those records. So that one kind of simple field will allow administrators to manage all of that. Next one are fields to indicate if a particular contact is a minor, or if they are a minor with parental consent, and then you have the ability to essentially block portal access if those conditions aren't true. So if your site allows minors, and the rule is that you need to have parental consent from those minors to go on, you can see here in the screenshot there are a couple of checkboxes indicating that the contact is a minor and that they are a minor with parental consent. You can then enable on your portal so that if those conditions aren't true, they're not able to access the portal. So again, that's just another one of those regulations from GDPR that Microsoft has included in there. And finally, the ability to require that users agree to a terms and conditions set up by administrators. So this is a great feature. I know we've done a custom implementation for these on portals a few times because even outside of GDPR, many customers are requiring that users accept terms and conditions. So this is a great new feature, regardless of where you're located. I think a lot of people are going to end up using this. And so you can essentially, you can set up your own kind of customized terms and conditions that a user has to agree to before they're allowed to kind of use anything in the portal. So that kind of covers, again, the three main areas in version 8.4. In terms of functionality, it's not the world's biggest release. The version 8.3 had a much longer laundry list of features. That being said, I think this was really more precipitated based on a couple of things requiring specific deadlines in terms of GDPR for May 25th, as well as the authentication keys being, starting to expire here very soon, because portals were kind of launched in the May timeframe as well in 2016, so we're kind of coming up on that 2-year timeframe. So I would say that had it not been for those dates, we may not have seen this release, but because of those dates, they had to kind of release this thing. It was nice to get the ability to view the server-side error details, but in the end, they didn't introduce a ton of other functionality, just a couple things that were a little more time-sensitive. Now, moving on here, we're going to start talking a little bit about the Adxstudio migration. So I'll just, for those of you who are maybe new to portals, I'll just give you a little bit of a background on what Adxstudio is, what portals are, that sort of thing, a little bit of the history. So Microsoft acquired Adxstudio in 2015. At that point, the current version of Adxstudio was version 7, and that version did work for both online and on-premise deployments. Within less than a year, Microsoft in 2016 released their version 8. So their version 8 is completely kind of software as a service application. It is hosted in the Azure cloud, but is completely managed by Microsoft. So you don't have access to go in there and change anything on the servers, update your own source code or anything like that. It's a completely software as a service application from Microsoft. as well as it's only available for Dynamics 365 online. So for any customers that are using Dynamics 365 or CRM on-premise, the new version 8 just simply is not an option. And there's really no kind of roadmap or direction from Microsoft saying that that's coming anytime soon or ever. So in August of 2017, what Microsoft did was they released the source code for their latest version, which at that point was version 8.3. So they essentially said, hey, here's all the source code for Portals. Here are all the solutions for Portals. If you want to, go ahead and install it yourself. So this allowed customers to deploy their own version of Portals and works for both online and on-premise. However, the major caveat to this is that this is a one-time release. Microsoft does not support the code if you're installing it yourself. So it's a one-time unsupported release. And kind of the direction was it's kind of a last resort. You can use it if you have to, but Microsoft has provided no guarantees on this source code release. Now, as soon as it was released, Adxstudio, which was the company that spun out of Adxstudio, they've kind of been leading this initiative about called the XRM Portals Community Edition. So what they did is they took this source code, uploaded it to GitHub, and the idea is that that's kind of the one central point where hopefully everyone, rather than just downloading the code directly from Microsoft, everyone kind of goes to the XRM Portals Community Edition. And if there are bug fixes that need to happen, as a community, we can kind of keep this thing up to date. If there are any major breaking changes in future versions of Dynamics, at least we can all contribute to this effort to give on-premise customers an options for kind of the immediate to short-term future. So that is available on GitHub, again, XRM Portal Community Edition, led by Adxstudio, and there's a number of partners who are contributing to that to kind of keep it up to date. That being said, don't expect that any new features that you're seeing in version 8.4, the ones that we just went through, for example, you won't see any of the GDPR features in there because those were not available in version 8.3. So that's kind of the downside to using that the open source release, is that it is kind of what it is. Whatever Microsoft released, that's what we get. Now the big news was in September of 2017, Microsoft announced that support for version 7 would officially end on August 1st, 2018. So up to this point and up to August 1st, Microsoft has been, in a limited way, keeping Adxstudio Portals version 7 up to date. Security fixes, there was a kind of a fairly major issue last year where there were kind of some minor endpoint changes to Dynamics, and so Portals just didn't, it didn't work. So, and it was just kind of, you just had to update some DLLs. But Microsoft has been releasing updates to version 7. They haven't been doing any new features, but kind of security fixes, that sort of things. So the announcement in September was that's all going to stop August 1st, 2018. And then in February, what they did is they released their documentation, essentially their official guide on, okay, you're on version 7. What should you do to kind of move forward and be current, knowing that as of August 1st, you're not going to have any, you're not going to be on an officially supported product. So that's what I'm going to dive into a little bit more here, is the fact that document that they've released. They've provided a number of different options, and I'm just going to kind of go through that document a little bit here and kind of give you a brief overview of what your options are if you're kind of in the spot where you're on version 7 and you want to upgrade to version 8. So the document kind of began with highlighting some of the features that existed in version 7 but don't exist in version 8. Now this is important because there are a few significant features in there, and so customers leveraging those features in version 7 need to figure out what they're going to do when they go to version 8. The two biggest ones would be the SharePoint integration. So in version 7, you could, if you had the kind of the out-of-the-box SharePoint integration in Dynamics, you could expose those documents as well on your portal. That just simply isn't the case in version 8. There's no out-of-the-box SharePoint integration whatsoever. And the other big one would be the shopping cart kind of payment e-commerce functionality. That's another feature that just didn't make it into version 8. So if you're leveraging that in version 7, when you go to do an upgrade, those features are going to disappear. So the guidance from Microsoft is you need to look at you either have to kind of develop your own custom functionality or use a third-party solution to fill those holes. But I'd also like to point out that while the document mentions those two major features, that being the SharePoint and the shopping cart e-commerce functionality, there are other features on that list that didn't make it into the document. So there are other features that are in version 7, didn't make it into version 8, but the document doesn't mention. So a big one of those would be the event management. Fairly popular feature. In fact, I think we've probably done ourselves a significant number of event management projects, a lot more than we ever did with e-commerce or SharePoint integration. So to us, the event management is the big the big hole when going from 7 to 8, because that simply just doesn't exist in 8. So the lesson here is make sure that you're doing kind of a feature by feature check to ensure that there are no surprises when you upgrade, because there are, it's very likely that you are leveraging some sort of features, unless you're doing a fairly basic implementation, just leveraging entity lists and entity forms, that it could be that you're using a feature that is no longer supported. So you kind of have to itemize all the things you're doing with your portal and then confirm that those would exist in version 8. Now, there are some things that are new in version 8 that didn't exist in version 7. So again, when you're looking at migrating from 7 to 8, you need to consider how things have changed as well. So the big thing is the fact that version 8 has a new multilingual data model. So for those of you familiar with version 7, what we have our web pages. In version 8, we continue to have web pages, but for every single page on your portal, there are actually at least 2 web pages. So there is what's called the root page, and then there's one page for every language that you have turned on. So for example, if you have just English turned on your portal, you'll have, for every page, there will actually be 2 web page records. There's the root page, and then there's a page that contains the content for English. If you have French and English turned on, you're going to end up with 3 pages, your root page, one for English, one for French. In the previous version, in version 7, you simply just had one page. And if you wanted to, the multilingual solution was to have separate portals and kind of separate copies of your website in the different languages. Version 8, it has this concept of root pages and all kind of localized content pages. This means that if you are going to upgrade from version 7 to version 8, there's a fairly significant data model change. Any of the pages you have right now, it's not a case of just simply copying them into the new environment, because you will have to set up at least one root page, a root page and a localized page for that stuff. So that is, in my opinion, kind of the biggest change from version 7 to version 8 that people will need to consider. Now, I'll get into this a little bit more in a few minutes here, but the good news is that Microsoft has provided some code to help facilitate that migration, so all is not lost, but it is, to me, the biggest challenge. And I know when we saw the multilingual come out and we were kind of waiting for the upgrade documentation, as soon as we saw that significant data model change, we thought, okay, this is going to be the big challenge with upgrading from version 7 to version 8. A couple other things that have been included are the portal comments. So that's a new entity in the CRM used to replace. In version 7, there are a number of places where it used notes to capture comments. For example, typically it's used on the cases when people are adding notes on a case. In version 8, those are typically done using portal comments as opposed to the notes entity. Same with feedback. In version 7, you had some entities called like idea votes, idea comments, blog post comments. All those different entities have been kind of merged into one single entity called feedback. So again, it's just a case of migrating that data in from the old entities into the new entities if you want everything to kind of play all nicely together. As well as knowledge articles, I know this has been a topic that's been somewhat confusing to myself. There's all these different versions of knowledge base. There's the articles, there's the knowledge base records, there's the knowledge articles. The new ones, I believe, are called knowledge articles. Those are the ones that we want to be using moving forward. So Portals version 8 uses knowledge articles, whereas the previous versions were using the kind of the legacy versions of the knowledge base. A couple other features here that have been added. So access control rules now have a scope. There's some people using that feature. We don't use that feature a ton, so I won't dive too much into that. Web templates are now associated to a website. So again, if you're upgrading from version 7 to version 8, you just need to make sure that all of your web templates are associated to a website. As I mentioned, there is that process that can automatically migrate web pages to the new data model. There's kind of a little glitch with that where if you have pages that you previously deleted, which in theory, which actually get deactivated in the CRM, the process which creates all of the localized content pages will create localized content for all your deactivated pages as well. And those the deactivated pages will have those content pages, and those content pages will actually be active. So what you need to do is you have to go in and actually deactivate those records, because you'll get a bunch of, you'll get kind of some strange sitemap and 404 errors when you have root pages which are deactivated, but the localized content pages are active. Just a quick comment here from Eric, and asking if we could share with us the Microsoft release documentation on the upgrade path. And yeah, I'll certainly do that. I can give you a link to it's a PDF document. So I'll certainly make sure that I include that link. A couple other minor changes. There's been some custom CSS changes. So if you had written some CSS that specifically targeted some of the classes in the portal, those have been modified just a little bit, so you need to be aware that you may have to touch up some of your CSS. And the last one that they mentioned is that image files now need what they call kind of properly encoded URLs. So for example, they shouldn't have any spaces in your images. If you do, you need to kind of clean those up as well, because those are, while supported in version 7, were no longer supported in version 8. Now, I'll just talk briefly here on what are the prerequisites for the Adxstudio to version 8 migration. So essentially, you need Dynamics 365 CRM 2016 update 1 or later, and that's simply just a requirement of the solution files that need to be imported for the new version. And then it's supported to upgrade from Adxstudio Portals version 7.0.25 or later. So if you are on Adxstudio version 7.0.24 or earlier, hopefully you're not on version 6 or version 5 or 4, but I have run into those even now, people on older legacy versions. If you're in that unfortunate situation, the only kind of supported upgrade path is to make sure that you upgrade all the way up to version 7 of Portals, and then you can proceed from there. So you just need to make sure you're on version 7.0.25. So the document then gets into what are your hosting options. So there are two main options that Microsoft provides for hosting your portals. So one is you can host it with Microsoft. So this path means that you will actually get a real supported Microsoft portal. Essentially, at the end of the process, you say, hey, Microsoft, I've got all my data in my CRM. Please provision one of your standard portal websites for me and point it at my CRM. So this is awesome because it allows you to have access to future upgrades. It basically gets you kind of to the latest and greatest, and it would be as if you'd be in the same kind of supported situation as anyone else who had just spun up a version 8 from scratch. Now, be aware that this does require that you get licensing from Microsoft. Typically, your first portal is free, but you do have to have the proper licensing in place. But this is obviously by far the most recommended solution. If you can go this way, if you can get to the point where you're using the officially supported Microsoft channels, that is certainly an option. Essentially what you do is you get you can use the downloaded source code, so the version 8.3 that they released. If you can get all of your version 7 upgraded to version 8.3, you can then put in a support ticket with Microsoft and say, hey, I've got everything upgraded. Can you provision a portal website for me? And you can work with support and you can get that done. So that is, again, because it's supported, because you're going to get new upgrades, that is by far the most recommended solution. But again, unfortunately, not an option for on-premise customers. Microsoft just simply doesn't support that. So if you're on-premise, Microsoft hosted is not a viable option for you. The other option is self-hosted. So this is using that version 8.3 source code. Again, this is completely unsupported by Microsoft. So in terms of support, you're looking at getting support from either your partner or, again, strongly recommend that you leverage the Adxstudio Portals Community Edition if you're going down this path. That way you're going to get the kind of the improvements that anyone else is making to that open source project as opposed to kind of being on your own island. So if you're on premise, this is really your only option. You know, you're going to be responsible for your own hosting costs, maintenance, all that sort of stuff, but at least you got the 8.3 source code to kind of get you started. Also, this option does allow for custom codes. So since you have access to the full source code for Portals, you can really do whatever you want. It's very basically similar to the version 7 model, other than the fact that it's unsupported. So if you are a customer who made a significant investment in custom coding in version 7 or earlier, and you're unable or unwilling to kind of abandon that investment or kind of upgrade to a more supported fashion, this may be the option for you. I know we've got a number of customers that we've done this with. So we've upgraded them to kind of version 8.3 of Portals, and you know, it works. It was a pretty painless process, and those were cases where we had made the customer had made a very significant investment in version 7 with a lot of custom code, and at this point it just simply wasn't viable for them to upgrade those to kind of an option where it was hosted with Microsoft. You know, some of those customers are on-premise, so it wouldn't have been an option anyway, but even for some of our online customers, they had just made, you know, such a significant investment in Portals code, custom Portals code, that we could at this point just simply upgrade them to the online version. Now, in terms of how do you actually go from version 7 to version 8, Microsoft presents two options. So the first option is what they refer to as re-implementation. And while it sounds like this is an option, and certainly is an option, it's really just saying, hey, do you know what you can do? You can actually uninstall version 7, start from scratch, and install version 8, and then do all of your work again. And that is effectively what the re-implementation plan is. So what you do is what we'd recommend you do is you take a backup of your CRM, and then you uninstall the Adxstudio solutions. Once you do that, because they are managed solutions, all of that data will be gone. You will lose all of your portal custom entities and fields and all that sort of stuff. Then what you do is you install version 8.3, the open source code release that Microsoft provided. You install version 8.3, and then you migrate all of your data back into it. Now, it is possible you could use some third-party migration tools to move your data across. So it may be a viable option. That may be, you know, maybe the best approach for you. Yeah, that's essentially the re-implementation option. None of your data is going to get moved across manually or automatically. You kind of are starting from scratch and manually moving those changes over. Option number 2 is the migration. So what they do for this is you have to create a couple site settings, because again, with the multilingual change, what you have to do is you have to tell the Microsoft scripts that they've created that says, hey, my portal, I want you to create a single language, and I want that language to be English. So there's 2 site settings essentially saying, yes, I want you to upgrade my data, and the second site setting is the language that my portal is right now is English or French or whatever happens to be your primary language on your portal. Once you set up those 2 sites, there's a PowerShell script that you can run. That PowerShell script installs all of the new solutions, all the new Microsoft solutions, as well as it transitions all of your web pages automatically to the new data model. But the important key here is that it won't include any of the data for the new features. New features coming out of for version in the Microsoft version, these new features are often, not always, but often implemented not as code in the portal, not as code in the source code, but actually as data in your CRM, such as web templates, Liquid, that type of thing. So with this solution, the only things that are, your data is being transformed, but no new data is being added to your CRM. It's not going to introduce all the web templates and liquid code that are required for the new features. So you're essentially going to get an upgraded version of the portal that you have right now, including the web pages being migrated, but it's not going to add all of the settings and data required for the new features. So if you are wanting to leverage the new features, what you're essentially going to have to do is copy the data for the new features into your CRM. So that typically involves setting up web pages, web page templates, web templates, content snippets, site settings, all the things that are required to enable these new features. You're going to have to do that manually as part of this. Once you've run the PowerShell script, which again installs the solutions and transitions all of your web pages, the next step is to uninstall the Adxstudio solutions. Now, it's important to note that if you want to move to the Microsoft version, that it is a requirement that you uninstall the Adxstudio solutions. They will not, you can't go to the Microsoft hosted version without uninstalling those. So it's important that you kind of go through that process. Now, if you are looking at going through that process, there's a couple blog posts out there. One would be from Colin Vermander from Adxstudio. He's got an excellent blog post on the steps of kind of how to run through this process. And I myself, a little shameless plug here, I've got a kind of a second blog post where I kind of go into a few more details about some of the challenges that we've run into. So just giving you a few more tips and tricks on how to go through this process if you want to do it. So the big one that I would say that we ran into is when we went to uninstall the Adxstudio solutions, it's important that you turn off, there's some plugins that you have to kind of disable, otherwise there's some dependency errors, so you're not going to be able to uninstall all of those solutions. But that's essentially what you're getting from the migration. You run the PowerShell scripts, which install the solutions, they transition your data, and then you uninstall the old Adxstudio solutions. Again, this doesn't handle any of the custom code that you've written. If you have custom code in the master portals project, if you're wanting to go to the Microsoft hosted solution, you're not able to add that because you're not going to control their code. If you're sticking with self-hosted, then you can start adding your own custom code to that solution if you so wish. Again, if you're going with the self-hosted solution, highly recommend, encourage you to use the XRM Portal Communities Edition. Otherwise, you're going to kind of end up on your own island where it's going to be probably a little bit more difficult to get support. So that kind of covers the Microsoft documentation on upgrading. Again, it's very much more of a high-level document saying here are some approaches you can take. And if you have a version 7 of Adxstudio that you've made no custom code changes to, the process can be fairly straightforward. The migration scripts that they provided will do a lot of the work for you. The minute you've gone in there and started writing your own custom C# code in the application, you're really, you're going to have to figure out how you want to migrate any of those features. It's not going to be an insignificant undertaking, and that's why, again, we've found a lot of customers end up going with the self-hosted option if they've made a significant investment in that code. At this point, I'd love to open it up to any questions if anyone has. I'm happy to answer your questions, and I'm willing to stick around here as long as there are questions to be asked.
Great, thank you, Nick. And please do enter your questions now. We've only had a couple come in so far, but we'll certainly leave things open at this point. So one question that came in is just asking about sharing the presentation deck. And Nicolas, I think we could probably do that after the event when we're also recording it, and we can share the recording too.
Yeah, for sure. We'll provide the deck, and then as part of that deck, what I'll do is I'll add a link in there to the actual Microsoft PDF for the upgrade documentation, so that people who are looking for that, if you're not able to find it on using Bing or Google, then there'll be a link to it in the PowerPoint slides.
Great. I want to remind folks also we do have a survey that'll come up after you leave today. We'd really appreciate any other feedback you can give about today's experience. It helps us. It helps our presenters as well for the future. Well, I am not seeing any other questions right now. Let's see. Maybe one's coming in now. We have a solution. We have solutions layered on top of Adxstudio solutions. and as a result, we are unable to uninstall the Adxstudio solutions. Must we get them uninstalled if we wish to move to MS Portals?
Yeah, so if you're going with the self-hosted option, not necessarily, because you're, but if you want to go with the kind of the official Microsoft hosted option, I do believe that they're going to ask that you get rid of those Adxstudio solutions. I believe the words that they use is that it's not supported to have those solutions in there. So if you have solutions that depend on those, you may do that. Now, depending on how, what dependencies you have, the solutions for the version 8 have many of the same entities. So if you've once you install the version 8 solutions, it could be that you are able to remove the Adxstudio solutions because the dependencies that you have are actually in both the version 8 and the version 7 solutions. So hopefully that you can kind of tweak your solutions if you need to. But my understanding is, yes, you'd have to remove the Adxstudio solutions, and that, but again, hopefully those dependencies are things that are still in version 8, and then it may not be as big of a problem.
Okay, another question that you might not have seen that just came in. You mentioned if a customer's version 7 portal is heavily customized, it's probably better to migrate to version 8.3 using the self-hosted approach. What would you recommend after that? How would or should the customer upgrade to 8.3, from 8.3 to 8.4 and after? And if a customer wants to go to Dynamics 365 Online, does it cause any issues or potential problems if the portal upgrade to 8.3 is self-hosted?
Yeah, so once we get kind of too far down the path, there's really no direction from Microsoft on how you might be able to upgrade, a future version. They have no intention of ever releasing anything for self-hosted other than 8.3. So my recommendation at this point is, if the customer is unable to migrate to the Microsoft version right now, is upgrade them to 8.3, but make any future investments in a way that would be supported in the Microsoft hosting option. Then slowly work away on all the features that you need, because when you're working on 8.3 and you're working on the self-hosted option, you can still design and build everything in a way that is supported with the new Microsoft version. So I would slowly kind of start working away on all those features, getting it to the point where your self-hosted version would be could work on CRM Online, and then at that point, then you could engage with Microsoft to get that moved. If you keep investing in the self-hosted option, my guess is that at no point would you be able to just upgrade to Microsoft. They're not going to just do that when 8.4, 8.5, 9.0, when those come out. We don't expect to have a source code release. So 8.3 is really the point where you need to make that migration. You don't need to necessarily make it today, but I would say any future investments you should make in a way that is supported with portals. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the idea of companion apps, there are ways of writing custom code that you can use in your portal. The code doesn't sit on your portal instance, but there are ways of doing all these things. For example, if you want SharePoint integration, Adxstudio has a product that allows you to have your SharePoint integration. So with portals, there really is nothing you can't do. It's just a different way of architecting the solution. So I would be investigating those options. Again, we're kind of referring to them as companion apps, where essentially you're setting up a server elsewhere that has web services that you can call from your portal and will allow you to do the custom code. I would be architecting everything in that way moving forward, moving all of your functionality to that model, and then hopefully at some point you can remove all of your custom code from the portal solution. Everything will be in your companion app, and then you can go through with the official upgrade from Microsoft.
All right, well, I think we are going to wrap it up there. I'm not seeing any other questions, so thanks to everyone in the audience for your time, for attending, for asking so many great questions, and we appreciate having you. And Nicolas, of course, thank you for taking the time to put this entire presentation together and present it to our audience. Much appreciated.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. And again, if anyone ever has any kind of follow-up questions, you can find us at engineeredcode.com. You can find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, that sort of thing. And we're happy to help if you have any questions. So if you have anything else you're looking for, feel free to get in touch with us.
Excellent. And with that, we will conclude today's event. Have a great day, everybody.